Speaking at the USIBC India Ideas Summit, as you would expect, rolling out the red carpet for investment from US firms. But he also talked about open minds and open markets leading to opportunities and options. Clearly, when he talks about open minds and open markets, it's also in reference to what's been going on globally between India and China, and of course between the US and China as well, as more and more countries are now beginning to call out Chinese double standard, not just on trade, but also on maritime security issues. So as you would expect, the Prime Minister not directly talking about anything related to China, but when he says open minds, open markets leading to greater prosperity, and that India and the United States are natural partners, clearly the indication and the message will be heard loud and clear in Beijing. How do we juxtapose this with the reality of what's happening on the ground over the last 2 months at the line of actual control, the Indian response to the Chinese aggression, and really what we are seeing, a global coalescing, if you will, of international opinion against China and against Chinese belligerents? Joining me now on the broadcast tonight, Andrew K.P. Leung is an international and independent strategist of China based in Hong Kong, G.V.L. Narasimha Rao, Member of Parliament and spokesperson of the BJP, Pawan Khera, spokesperson of the Congress Party, and Vivek Kachu, former secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Pawan Khera, you heard the Prime Minister's speech. Clearly, the Prime Minister, when he talks about open minds and open markets, is taking a dig at China, even though not naming China directly. You look at all the statements made by, Mike Pompeo or the U.S. Defense Secretary. They are all taking India's side in this fight against China that's happening at the line of actual control. And yet, we see the Congress Party, we see Mr. Rahul Gandhi release video after video saying that all of this is bunkum, that the BJP and the Prime Minister are taking the country for a ride. Why is that?
Zakka, support by a superpower, by another nation, is not just mere lip service, not just mere words. Where is the action? Did you see any country come forward aggressively talking about this issue? Barring, of course, Mr. Trump saying that Mr. Modi's mood is not very good. This is one aspect of China. Intelligence sharing, for example. There was a robust system of intelligence sharing between India and US. Where did we fail in our intelligence system also when the incursions were happening? One aspect is China. The other aspect is the so-called red carpet that you were talking about. Companies like Samsung and LG prefer Vietnam over India. When push comes to shove, what are the choices these companies have made? That's for everyone to see. So much for the ease of doing business, for example. The GSP issue, the maximum damage after demonetization, if some issue has caused us, is the GSP issue. The SME sector has collapsed because of the scrapping of GSP in 2018 of 90 products, out of which 50 were from India. Okay. So have we been able to protect the interests of our industry, of our trade? No, we haven't. Give me one example, barring these mega events of Namaste Trump. Where is the trade deal? Mr. Piyush Goyal tells us there is a mini trade deal in the offing. Where is that mini trade deal? Mr. Trump, and if I remember, Mr. Lighthizer cancelled his trip to negotiate the trade deal that was just before Mr. Trump was supposed to come to India in March. Lighthizer cancelled his trip. We don't see the trade deal. We don't see resolution of the GSP issue. We don't see any actionable.
No. I'll come to the trade aspect in just 1 second. I just want to talk about China for a moment, Pawanji. You ask where is the action? We have had recently, just in this past week, U.S. naval exercises with the USS Nimitz and with the USS Ronald Reagan, the two biggest aircraft carriers that America has. We've not seen those kind of exercises, at least up until now. We're going to be having exercises with Australia as part of the Quad and with Japan as part of the Quad. I'll just read to you what Mike Pompeo said today at this India Ideas Summit, just a couple of hours ago, that the Communist Party of China is a mutual threat to both India and the United States. I have not seen a U.S. Secretary of State use that language up until this crisis, blew up in the way that it did.
Zakka, this is a government which is on the brink of an election. So as I said, what they say doesn't really matter much in terms of what it means to India. For the simple reason, you're talking about Quad. When Wuhan happened, we got so confident of our Wuhan diplomacy that we forgot Quad. In fact, Quad member countries were not happy with India's lackluster response to Quad when Wuhan happened. So you can't have an inconsistent diplomacy centered absolutely around the Prime Minister. You have to have consistency. Even Quad, you don't see any consistency.
Let me get GVL Narasimha to respond to this.
Service from Quad
you know, what Pawan Khera is saying, it's all lip service, whether it's from the US Secretary of State, whether it's from Mr. Trump. Actually, on the ground, nothing has changed. The tensions continue in Pangong and in Bepsang. And you said disengagement is happening in 3 points. Even that, the Congress party is saying is not true. At least the videos that Rahul Gandhi has put out over the last few days.
No, Zakka, unfortunately, I thought we were discussing about this conference and the emerging India-US.
Of course, Pawan Khera has referred to that also, by the way.
But this pessimism of the Congress party, you're wasting time on them. The country doesn't want this pessimism, and nobody cares for the views that Rahul Gandhi expresses. I think this country is tired of the Congress party and its pro-China policy. I think if there is one mouthpiece of the China in the entire world today, it is the Congress party and its leader Rahul Gandhi. The people have understood that. So we don't need to waste much time on
answer
what
the
Rahul
questions.
Gandhi says
No,
or what
GVL, I mean, that's how we have a healthy democracy, and that's how we have healthy TV shows. Answer the questions that he has raised.
I'm saying how the US Secretary of State on repeat occasions supported this. India's stand in the standoff in Ladakh, and you have seen senators across spectrum in US coming out in support of India's stand and wanting to contain China. We have support from not just the US, from the entire world. When we carried out the surgical strikes, when we carried out the airstrike in Balakot, and we have got the support of all of them in naming Masood Azhar as an global terrorist. So we have had a series of diplomatic successes, and the entire whole world rallied behind India. And Congress has a very narrow prism, and they want to do their petty politics even on matters of international diplomacy.
Let me get Andrew Liang and Vivek Kaju into the conversation. Let me get Andrew Liang. It's close to midnight, I think, in Hong Kong, so he's been waiting patiently. Andrew Liang, the point is this. Just today, we have had, this whole issue flare up between the United States and China, a bizarre situation where the U.S. asked the Chinese to vacate their consulate in Houston. Chinese diplomats were seen burning documents while they were fleeing that building. I mean, what's going on? This is as bizarre as it gets.
Well, I think that this is, of course, nothing to do with the relationship between India and China. This closure of the U.S. consulate in Houston, the Chinese consulate in Houston. And if you force another country to close the consulate, and obviously the consulate staff, as in any other country, would have to burn a lot of secret papers. Right? That happens for any country whose consulate is closed in another.
No, but Mr. Liang, doesn't that naturally raise the question, what is it that these people were doing so secretively? That's exactly why the United States State Department asked you to shut the consulate down, because you were doing something fishy, because there was espionage going on in the name of diplomacy.
Well, I think that the burning of papers is by itself secret, because these papers are confidential, okay? But then, of course, the accusation is that a lot of the staff, they are doing espionage. But most consulates, most embassies are doing intelligence gathering or by any other name. But I think that, but other than focusing on this instant, the whole question about India-American relationship, Indian-China relationship, China-American relationship must be seen in the context of a 360 degrees pushback by the United States against China. And of course, the United States wants to rally all its allies around the world, India included, to push back against China.
So here, one second. Here's the thing, and I'm going to get Vivek Kaju to weigh in on this. Here's the dichotomy, and here's the problem. Even today, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said India should pursue an independent foreign policy. The dichotomy is that because of this action, this unprovoked aggression at the line of actual control, China is actually forcing India to go further into a strategic American embrace. It's not making India choose an independent foreign policy. It's having the opposite effect, Vivek Kaju.
Well, okay.
Vivek Kaju, let Vivek Kaju respond, please. Vivek Kaju.
No, I think India is pursuing an independent foreign policy. Independent foreign policy does not mean that one doesn't make choices, strategic choices at any particular point of time. I have 2 points to make. One, the Chinese have been terribly aggressive all over during this phase and for some time ever since President Xi Jinping assumed office. Now, I personally think that it was extremely a sign of great ineptitude on the part of the Chinese to take the actions they did in Ladakh, because they should have known that at this stage, undertaking this action would increase the coincidence of interests between India and America.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what we are witnessing today. So India is looking at America, I won't say with fresh eyes, but with a greater focus. And the Prime Minister's speech today, the 4 words which were takeaway for me, Zakka, were his appeal to the Americans American business when he said, basically do business, and I'm quoting the Prime Minister, with a nation you can trust.
Yeah.
The pandemic and the Chinese reaction, initial reaction, etc. to the pandemic, I think has broken a basic trust which American business had with China.
Yeah.
And that is a terrible sign of Chinese ineptitude again at this juncture. Now, my last point is, the question is that how do India and America manifest the coincidence of interest that is being witnessed at this time in practical terms?
Yeah.
And that is what we will have to see in the future. I'm optimistic that more and more American business will look to India, despite the problems that we have, and that there will be greater cooperation in the security sector, which will be, I think, mutually beneficial. And there are some reports that some kind of cooperation specific to Ladakh is already taking place.
Okay, let me go back to Pawan Khera. Just in terms of, we've seen the videos that Mr. Gandhi has put out. Clearly, the Congress party has been criticizing the government for, either giving out wrong information or withholding information or not speaking the truth about the LAC and the situation there. It's not like when the UPA was in power, there were no problems between New Delhi and Beijing. We remember the Depsang incident in 2013. We remember every time the Prime Minister would go to Arunachal Pradesh, there would be a message coming in from Beijing. There were stapled visas given to people from Jammu and Kashmir and from Arunachal Pradesh. The Prime Minister could never meet the Dalai Lama, publicly at least. I mean, so let's not make it that, all the problems have suddenly come up in the last 5 or 6 years.
Zakka, whether it was 62, whether it was any other Congress or non-BJP government, no other government, no other Prime Minister has had the courage to lie to the country, to speak in the voice of China, openly, shamelessly. I mean, here today, as a Congress spokesman, I have absolutely no qualms in saying Xi Jinping's behavior has been villainous towards India. Ask Mr. GVL Narasimha, how many times has the Prime Minister named China? They talk in the same language of China. Mr. Prime Minister gives them a clean check that China has not entered our territory. And China says, yes, we are on our own territory. And there goes Galwan Valley, our claim on Galwan Valley. Even today, spokesman after spokesman of this government has been lying to the country, misleading the country. And that's where our pain comes from. हमारा सीमा जा रहा है, हमारा जमीन जा रही है और आप झूठ बोल रहे हैं. Don't talk the language of China. Now that's something which we'll definitely keep pointing out. Rahul Gandhi is the only opposition leader who has the courage.
No, fair enough. But I find it amazing that both Congress is alleging the BJP of speaking China's language and the BJP is alleging the Congress of speaking China's language. But leave that as it may. But GVL, what Pawanji is saying on the show today. Earlier in the evening, I had Manish Tiwari on the show, and he said the same thing. Prime Minister has met Xi Jinping 18 times. Xi Jinping led India up the garden path, and India did not realize what his real intentions was. And the real intentions, blew up in the way that it did in Galwan on June 15th.
But which Prime Minister in this country had ever shown the kind of gumption to tell the China to suffer the consequences if they dare to look at India? Manmohan Singh did not even gather courage to say this to Chinese. He surrendered 620 square kilometers. This is what Shyam Saran, former Foreign Secretary, has stated on record. And Jawaharlal Nehru surrendered more than 36,000 square kilometers.
Pawan Khera, let GVL finish his point, please. Pawan Khera, let GVL finish his point. Let him finish his point.
Best way to fight China is to surrender India's land, thousands of square kilometers. If that is the way they think China can be fought, if they think the best way to fight China is to take money from Chinese embassy in Delhi, meet Chinese ambassadors stealthily, and take the China line, if they think that is the best way to fight China, I'm sorry, people of India will not take this kind of this kind of
Pawan Khera respond. Rahul Gandhi has had meetings with the Chinese ambassador. Even when Doklam was happening, Mr. Gandhi went and met the Chinese ambassador. Why?
With the same, in the presence of...
One second. GVL, you asked some very critical questions. Let Pawan Khera respond, please.
2018, March 31st, there was this major Dalai Lama event at the Thyagaraja Stadium in Delhi. Mr. Prime Minister personally intervened and got it cancelled because of Chinese pressure. Mr. Narendra Modi did that. One example after the other of Mr. Narendra Modi buckling down under Chinese pressure. Why? Because as Chief Minister of Gujarat, China was the only country which embraced him, kept inviting him, kept meeting each other, being in charge when he used to visit China. We all know what was happening.
But Pawan,
so don't,
once again. But Pawan Khera, as Prime Minister, he's met with Donald Trump, he's met with Shinzo Abe, he's met with Lee Hsien Loong. I mean,
don't interrupt me.
No, I'm not interrupting you. One second. Let's draw some, some baseline here.
You draw some lines. Don't interrupt me when I'm talking.
Pawan Khera, are you saying that are you saying that as Prime Minister he should not have ever met Xi Jinping? Is that what you're saying?
Did I say that?
No, then what are you saying?
As Prime Minister of India, you cannot give a clean sheet to China कि हमारी जमीन पर कोई नहीं आया है.
किसने दिया है?
Have you closed your mind? Just a sec. Ask me not to interrupt. Zakka.
GVL, one sec, let him finish. GVL, one sec, let him finish. Then I'll come back to you.
GVL lies and misquotes Mr. Shyam Saran. Mr. Shyam Saran never said this in his report. I have read the report.
Read his book.
GVL has not read. No, he has not. You are misquoting him. You are a liar.
He was
like your Prime Minister.
Your Prime Minister.
One second. Let's refrain from personal attacks, please. Let's refrain from personal attacks, please.
You cannot change facts, Pawan. You and Rahul Gandhi.
You are a liar.
Want to emulate Rahul Gandhi.
Mr. GVL Narasimha Rao.
No personal attacks. Gentlemen, come on, please. Gentlemen, no personal attacks. No, not on this show. Not on this show, please. No personal attacks. But GVL, I think a legitimate question is, we've had a process of disengagement, at least certainly in Galwan, in Hot Springs and in Gogra. We're still talking to the Chinese about Pangong and about Depsang. But today there were reports that there are just as much Chinese troops there across these three places, about 40,000 troops beyond the buffer zone. But what have we really achieved in this disengagement? It's been going on since the 6th or 5th of June.
No, Zakka, you see, beyond what they have, how many troops they have in their territory is something that we cannot dictate to them. But we have really
in our territory,
because successive Congress governments did not even build the border road.
No, Pawanji, one second, please let him respond. Please let him respond. When he intervened, when he intervened, when you were speaking, I asked him to give you a moment. He did. Please extend him the same courtesy.
He has to be very clear about that.
No, please.
Only this government has taken seriously, which led to a standoff. But we have made it very clear.
Okay.
You will have to go beyond. You have to ensure the status quo ante is maintained. So certainly, I think there is absolutely no room for India, no room for China, even to take an inch of land.
Let me now go to Vivek Kaju because I need to take a final word.
I want him to
first surrender an inch of land. He does not surrender an inch of land. It's only in the imagination of Rahul Gandhi.
One second, apologize for what?
Repeating these lies.
One second. GVL, one second. Apologize for what, Pawan?
Mr. Shyam Saran never said that 640 square kilometers of India has been surrendered to China under UPA. Mr. Shyam Saran's report does not mention that. So he's lying.
He said that. He thought only it was.
No, you are a liar. Sorry.
No, okay. I'm going to move on from that detail. I'm going to go back to Vivek Kaju. Vivek Kaju, at least can we, I mean, I know this has been a tremendous, thing that blew up in the way that it did, what happened in Galwan, but at least one silver lining, if I can use that phrase, out of this is today in India, amongst policymakers, amongst diplomats, no one is talking about things like, Panchsheel or Hindi Chini Bye Bye or Asian Century. We have now taken off collectively the rose-tinted glasses with which we were viewing China. We now are seeing it for what it is, and that is, if not an adversary, certainly a country that's not comfortable with India's rise, and we need to deal with it as is.
The Chinese strategic challenge has always been India's greatest strategic challenge. There's no doubt about it. And the China-Pakistan nexus only augments that challenge. Now, if there was ever any doubts in Indian minds, and I don't know why there were these doubts about China's intentions towards India, those doubts are now conclusively over. Today, the Chinese are manifesting that their challenge, their inimical approaches to India most directly. And I would beg, literally, again, I repeat myself, I would beg the spokespersons of both the political parties to really think and introspect if this is not the time for the political class to come together to develop a consensus on how to meet this challenge. There is a time for politics, gentlemen, but there is a time for coming together. And this is that time. History will not forgive the political class if it does not come together.
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you.
When I hear Zakka, one last sentence. When I hear the charges being traded, I'm aghast. I've spent my entire life in diplomacy, in the Indian Foreign Service, and I'm aghast that our political class, at a time when we are in a pandemic situation, when the nation demands the political class's unity, that such charges are being traded.
I'll give the final word to both Pawan Khera and to GVL. I absolutely agree with what Vivek Kaju has said, and we've seen this in any democracy. In America, the Democrats and Republicans come together when the national security is at stake. In Britain, the Conservatives and the Labour Party comes together whenever national security is at stake. Even and may I remind our panelists, even when the Kargil war happened in 1999, when the BJP was in power and the Congress was in opposition, at that time the Congress was, seen to be with the government during the war. I don't know why, Pawan Khera, this time around,
Zakka,
that's not the case.
I'll tell you why. During those days, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee didn't lie to the country that nobody has entered our territory. Well, he waged a war, and we were with him. Here, when the Prime Minister openly, I'm sorry to be using the word, but shamelessly lies to the country and starts attacking the Congress because we are questioning them. Mr. Kaju, with due respect to your absolutely well-taken wisdom, look at the difference between those Prime Ministers and today's Prime Minister. Openly, shamelessly lying to the country and then starts the vilification campaign of the opposition parties. अरे जो आपको चाइना को जवाब देना चाहिए, आप हमारे पीछे पड़ रहे हैं. And your relationship, the foundations of India Foundation, Vivekanand Foundation, RSS, their relationship with China and the party school and the Communist Party of China is open.
Okay. I really wish this would be a moment of coming together. But GVL, I'll give you the final word. GVL, the point is that it's up to, and I remember this again. I'm going back to Kargil. In 1999 because it was the government that took the initiative of keeping the opposition briefed. And this time too, the Prime Minister took the initiative to keep the opposition briefed. But as you've heard from Pawan Khera and numerous Congress spokespersons, they are still continuing to badger the point that the Prime Minister, by saying that Chinese are not on our land, was actually was being economical with the truth.
Yeah, okay. The Prime Minister will say what is the truth. He will not say something to please either TV anchors or the opposition leader. And the rest of the opposition behaved in a very decent manner. It's only Rahul Gandhi because they they have received
अभी
money
भी आप
from
चीन
China.
को villain
They
नहीं
are
बोलने
acting
को
as
तैयार हैं।
Chinese agents. I will have no
Zakka,
qualms with saying
I
that.
have said
And
it
this is
openly that
the
China has
Rahul
been
Gandhi
villain
has
towards
the
India.
has the label
Mr.
of the most
GVL has not
egregious
uttered a
liar.
word against
I
China.
think he
चीन
has
के खिलाफ बोलने
apologized
की
to
हिम्मत
Supreme
CVL
Court
की नहीं है, क्योंकि
repeatedly
मोदी
for
जी
uttering lies. I think therefore
चीन
they
के
cannot
विरुद्ध
put
एक
this
शब्द नहीं
label to
बोलते हैं
anybody
आप,
else.
क्योंकि
If
आपकी
Rahul
हिम्मत
Gandhi
नहीं है।
has
मैं तो
got
बोल
this
रहा हूँ,
label
आप भी
from the
बोलिए।
highest court of India. Second,
क्योंकि
for the
मोदी जी
Congress
भी झूठ
party, it
बोलते
has
हैं,
become
आप
a
भी झूठ
habitual.
बोलते हैं, दोनों
The
चीन से
Congress
डरते
party
हैं।
is a habitual offender, and
चीन
they
से
want to
डरिए मत।
consistently lower the morale of the armed
चीन
forces.
से
They
डरिए
did
मत।
that in surgical strikes.
ओपनली
They
बोलिए, चीन
they
ने
questioned
गलत किया
surgical
है।
strikes.
हम तो
They
बोल रहे हैं,
demanded
आप भी
proof.
बोलिए।
They questioned Balakot
You
airstrike.
are afraid
of
China.
They
Why are
always
you afraid of
insult
China?
our
I
armed
want to
forces.
know.
All right.
And even on
I'm go-
Galwan,
Why
they
are
want
you
to
I'm going to
afraid
wrap
of
up.
China?
I'm going to wrap up. I want to thank
Why?
GVL
Because they
Narasimha Rao,
want to
Pawan
send
Khera,
them
and Vivek Kaju. I'm going to wrap up with this part of Brass Tacks. But it's really sad that and I go back to the example of other democracies, whether it's the US, UK. You see this across the world. Even now, the whole face-off that's happening between China and Australia. Even in Australia, as divided as their polity is, the two major parties have come together to try and take on the Chinese threat, as it were. Let's see, and we can only hope that will happen in India too someday. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about all the other stories, including the corona story, as we are fast approaching 12 lakh cases and fast approaching also 4.5 lakh active cases. Where is the story moving as far as the pandemic is concerned?